When you hear the words Third Reich, your mind goes to the same handful of faces. Hitler at a microphone, Himmler behind round glasses, Goebbels with his pointed jaw, men in black uniforms signing documents that killed millions. That is the official picture. It is also incomplete, because behind those men, inside their bedrooms, their dining rooms, their film studios, their cultural ministries, and their concentration camps, stood women. Not silent, not decorative, not victims of circumstance. They turned the gears. They built the illusion. They managed the everyday machinery of a state that murdered 6 million Jews, 20 million Soviet citizens, and dragged the planet into a war that killed 75 million people in total. Some of them swung whips inside the barbed wire. Others poured champagne for ambassadors. One of them controlled the lives of 30 million German women through a single state office. One poisoned her own 6 children to keep them from living in a world without Nazism. And one of them invented the visual language that hypnotized an entire nation into believing the whole nightmare was beautiful. In the next 15 minutes, you will meet all 5. Their influence escalates step by step, from a private villa next to a crematorium, all the way to a camera lens that rewrote the rules of mass manipulation forever. Buchenwald concentration camp. 5 miles north of Weimar, the city of Goethe and Schiller, the cradle of German classical culture, now hosting a death factory. The commandant lived in a comfortable villa just inside the camp perimeter. His wife was named Ilse Koch. She had married SS Standartenführer Karl Otto Koch in 1936. By 1937, she had a title of her own among the inmates. Die Hexe von Buchenwald, the Witch of Buchenwald. She was 29 years old. She had no military rank, she had no official authority, and yet she walked through the camp on horseback, often with a riding whip in her hand, and prisoners who failed to remove their caps fast enough, or who looked up at her, were beaten on the spot. Some were beaten to death. She did not need permission. She was the commandant's wife. That was enough. According to testimony given at the Dachau trials in 1947, Ilse Koch developed a specific interest in inmates with tattoos. Prisoners reported being ordered to strip in front of her. Those with decorative tattoos were noted down. A number of them later disappeared into the camp infirmary and never came out. In the post-war investigations, U.S. Army prosecutors collected evidence and witness statements regarding objects allegedly made from prisoner skin found in the Koch household, including a lampshade, book covers, and the preserved shrunken head of a Polish inmate displayed during the Nuremberg subsidiary trials. The lampshade story became internationally infamous. Parts of the physical evidence were later disputed in court. Other parts, the human skin book bindings, the preserved tattooed sections of skin found in the camp pathology lab, were not. Ilse Koch was tried twice. She received a life sentence from a West German court in 1951. In 1967, in a prison cell in Aichach, she hanged herself with a bedsheet. She represents the lowest level of the hierarchy. A private citizen, married into power, handed absolute control over human lives, and using it without restraint. This was the Reich at its most domestic. Blood under the fingernails of a housewife. But terror in the camps was the regime's underside. On the surface, Nazi Germany needed something completely different. It needed glamour. It needed champagne, opera, and a face the foreign press could photograph without flinching. That face belonged to the next woman, and she worked not in a camp, but in the salons of Berlin. Emmy Sonnemann was a stage actress from Hamburg, trained in classical theater, tall, blonde, with the bearing of a Baroque countess. In April 1935, she married Hermann Göring, the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany. Their wedding was a state event. Hitler personally served as the witness. Berlin was decorated as if a royal house had returned to the throne. And from that moment forward, Emmy Göring occupied a strange and powerful role. Adolf Hitler refused to publicly marry Eva Braun. He insisted on appearing as a man wedded only to Germany. That left a vacancy at the top of the social ladder. Emmy filled it. Quietly, deliberately, she became the de facto First Lady of the Third Reich. She hosted foreign ambassadors at Kavenhal, the Göring's enormous hunting estate in the Schorfheide forest. She received the Duke and Duchess of Windsor in October 1937, a visit photographed and circulated in the international press as proof that the new Germany was a civilized European power. She held seats of honor at the Berlin State Opera. She influenced casting decisions. She intervened personally to protect specific Jewish performers she had worked with in her theater years, a fact that complicates her legacy but does not erase it. For every individual she helped, hundreds of thousands of others were being processed through the rising camp system her husband helped administer. Her dinners were instruments of state. While Dachau expanded, while Buchenwald opened its gates in July 1937, Emmy Göring served 8-course meals to British lords, Italian counts, and Japanese diplomats. She projected the image of an old European monarchy reborn. Stability, tradition, culture. It was a mask. A beautifully embroidered mask over a state apparatus that was, at that exact moment, preparing the legal framework for the Nuremberg race laws and the industrial annihilation of European Jewry. Emmy Göring was denazified after the war and given a 1-year sentence. She lived until 1973, never publicly renouncing her husband. The high society mask handled the foreigners, but Nazi Germany needed something more invasive. It needed control over every kitchen, every nursery, every womb in the country. For that, the regime created an entirely new office, and it appointed a woman who would weaponize the daily routines of 30 million people. In February 1934, a 32-year-old widow and mother of 4 from the small town of Adelsheim was appointed Reichsfrauenführerin, Reich Women's Leader. Her name was Gertrud Scholtz-Klink. She was the only woman in the entire Third Reich to hold a major state bureaucratic position with real institutional weight. Hitler called her the perfect Nazi woman. Heinrich Himmler regarded her as a model administrator. Under her command sat the Deutsches Frauenwerk and the NS Frauenschaft. Together, these organizations grew to encompass more than 30 million German women, roughly the entire adult female population of the country. Her job was simple in concept and totalitarian in execution. She reached into the private home and rewired it. She enforced Eintopfsonntag, one-pot Sunday, a regulation requiring families to eat a single cheap stew once a month, with the money saved donated to the Winter Relief Fund. Block wardens checked compliance. She supervised the ideological education of millions of girls through the Bund Deutscher Mädel, the female branch of the Hitler Youth. By 1944, membership stood at roughly 4.5 million girls aged 10 to 18. They were trained in racial hygiene, in the rejection of non-Aryan partners, in the duty to bear large numbers of healthy children for the Führer. Birth quotas were promoted through the Mutterkreuz, the Mother's Cross, bronze for 4 children, silver for 6, gold for 8 or more. Millions were distributed by 1939, and when the Wehrmacht began bleeding men into the Eastern Front after 1941, it was Scholtz-Klink's apparatus that mobilized German women into armaments factories. By 1944, women made up over 50% of the workforce in critical war industries inside Germany. She controlled bodies, she controlled meals, she controlled cradles. She controlled the assembly lines that produced the shells fired into Stalingrad. After the war, she fled, lived under a false identity, and was finally arrested in 1948. She received a 30-month sentence. She published a book in 1978 defending the role of women under National Socialism. She never apologized. She died in 1999, aged 96. She controlled the routines. But for those routines to be obeyed, not just out of fear, but out of love, the population needed a face to worship, a living idol. That idol was waiting. Magda Goebbels, wife of Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. She was the most photographed woman in Germany. The state press called her the First Lady of the Third Reich, competing for that title with Emmy Göring, but winning it in the eyes of the German public. Why? Because she had the children. Helga, Hildegard, Helmut, Holdine, Hedwig, Heidrun. 6 children, all with names beginning with the letter H, a deliberate echo of Hitler. 6 perfect specimens of Nazi racial doctrine, displayed in newsreels, in magazines, on postcards. She was engineered into the ultimate Aryan mother. Her image was not an accident. It was a weapon, designed in the propaganda ministry to convince German mothers across the Reich that the highest fulfillment of their existence was to produce sons, and then surrender those sons to the Eastern Front. By 1943, over 2 million German soldiers had already died. Mothers across the country read her interviews, looked at her photographs, and were told that their grief was holy, that their sons had died for something greater. This worked. The cult of Magda Goebbels was a primary engine of voluntary, fanatical sacrifice on the German home front. Then came May 1945. The Soviet 8th Guards Army was 3 blocks from the Reich Chancellery. Hitler shot himself on April 30th. Magda and Joseph Goebbels remained in the Führerbunker with their 6 children. On the afternoon of May 1st, 1945, a dentist named Helmut Kuntz injected morphine into each of the 6 children to sedate them. Then, according to his post-war testimony and the testimony of SS officer Rochus Misch, Magda Goebbels personally placed crushed cyanide ampules between the teeth of each sleeping child and pressed their jaws shut. Helga was 12. Heidrun, the youngest, was 4. Magda had written a letter days earlier to her son from her first marriage. In it, she stated, in her own hand, that a world without National Socialism was not worth living in, and therefore her children should not live in it either. She and her husband then walked up the bunker stairs to the garden and ended their own lives. This was the absolute terminal point of ideological radicalization. A mother murdering her own 6 children to protect them from a future without Hitler. But here is the uncomfortable question. Magda Goebbels was the image. She was the poster. Who built the visual machinery that made the poster believable in the first place? That brings us to the apex of this list. Nuremberg, September 1934. The 6th Nazi Party Congress. A 32-year-old former dancer and actress was given an unprecedented production budget, a crew of 170 people, 30 cameras, and absolute artistic control. Her name was Leni Riefenstahl. The result was Triumph des Willens, Triumph of the Will. 114 minutes long, released in March 1935. This was not a documentary. It was the invention of a visual religion. Riefenstahl placed cameras on elevators built into flagpoles to shoot Hitler from below at godlike angles. She mounted cameras on rail tracks to glide along ranks of soldiers, turning marching men into hypnotic geometric patterns. She used aerial photography from a Junkers aircraft to film Hitler's arrival in Nuremberg as if a deity were descending from the clouds. She cut the rally to music with the rhythm of an opera. Political theater had never looked like this before, anywhere, by anyone. She did it again in 1938 with Olympia, her 2-part film of the 1936 Berlin Olympic Games. She invented underwater diving shots, slow-motion athletic photography, and tracking shots of runners that became the foundational grammar of every sports broadcast on Earth for the next 90 years. Modern televised sport, the camera angles, the slow motion, the music edits, descends directly from Riefenstahl. So does the visual style of countless political campaigns, music videos, and Hollywood epics. Her cinematic genius gave Nazism something money cannot buy. It gave the regime a sacred image of itself. It convinced ordinary Germans that they were not citizens of a corrupt dictatorship, but participants in a mythological event. Without that conviction, the unprecedented domestic obedience that allowed Germany to invade Poland in September 1939 and to keep fighting until Berlin was rubble would not have been possible. Riefenstahl lived to be 101 years old. She died in 2003. Until her last interview, she insisted she had been only an artist. The footage speaks differently. She was the woman whose camera changed the world, and not for the better. Five women, 5 completely different roles, 1 regime. A sadistic commandant's wife with a whip, a glamorous hostess pouring champagne for ambassadors, a bureaucrat controlling 30 million private kitchens, a propaganda icon who murdered her own children, a film director who hypnotized a nation through a lens. Together, they prove something uncomfortable. A totalitarian dictatorship is not built only on the bayonets of soldiers. It is built in salons, in bedrooms, in nurseries, on magazine covers, and through the viewfinder of a camera held by a genius. The men signed the orders. These women made the orders feel normal, glamorous, patriotic, beautiful, inevitable. That is why they belonged at the heart of the machine. And that is why their story is rarely told as openly as it should be. Thank you for watching. If this kind of deep historical investigation is what you are here for, subscribe to the channel. We go this deep every week. And if you want to look closer at the woman who occupied the top spot on this list, we have a dedicated deep dive video on our channel covering Leni Riefenstahl and her ultimate contract with the devil. Click on the screen now. I'll see you there.